You either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. That is the ever-memorable quote from The Dark Knight, which just so happens to be a Warner Brothers film, which is soon to be owned by Netflix. We celebrated when Netflix brought us movies into our living rooms, despite, killing Blockbuster and video rentals. Then we celebrated when it gave us an endless online library, despite hurting physical media ownership and hurting back-end ancillary revenue. Hell, we even celebrated when it started producing original content, even though that jump-started a streaming arms race and killed low pricing. And now Netflix has set its sights on an all-new victim: the death of the American film industry as we know it.
So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause.
How did we get here? How did Netflix go from zero to hero to possibly catastrophically burning the entire thing to the ground? It's come a long way from being this innocent online mail order renter. It's kind of weird that it's this entire empire that was built from a simple solution to strict checkout times and pricey late fees. Order your rentals online, they said. Keep them as long as you want, they said. We'll have a few laughs. What could possibly go wrong? Oh God, everyone is dead! Blockbuster would have the chance to buy Netflix, all for the low price of only $50 million.
In come the Blockbuster guys, and we make our pitch. And then they ask the big question, how much? And we figured we're $50 million in the hole, so $50 million. Finally dawns on me they're trying to suppress laughter.
They would pass on this deal, believing they could jumpstart their own competitive mail order service for lower than what it would cost for acquisition. Now, this was all easier said than done, especially as behind the scenes, online rental was never Netflix's endgame, as they raced to develop the first major online streaming platform, which was released in 2007. The films at first were limited, the quality questionable, as it would fluctuate between a very steady 720p and 420p. Yet they quickly scooped up the rights to outside shows like The Office and entire catalogs, including a lucrative deal with Starz for $20 million. They expanded extraordinarily fast, scary fast, until soon they had an app on every smart TV, Blu-ray player, and even the Xbox One, which honestly was a little too proud of their TV capabilities, okay? Kind of killed their gaming industry a little bit. That's another story. Blockbuster, though, could not catch up to Netflix fast enough, and it was buried under a triple whammy of Netflix streaming, Redbox conveniency, and their own internal boardroom squabbles. A billion-dollar empire that stretched from the Pacific to the Atlantic, and across the entire world, was killed in basically only a few years. Though we may look back fondly at our times buying pizza and renting movies from a physical store, at the time, we hardly shed a tear. We just looked at them as they sank and saluted the fallen. All the other studios started to see which way the wind was blowing. The future wasn't just here, Netflix was sailing off with it into the sunset, virtually uncontested. So big studios hired themselves some programmers and simultaneously launched competing streaming platforms. Begun, the streaming wars were. It was a bloodbath, a fight to scoop up television and movie rights as studios tried to consolidate strength around pre-existing intellectual properties. If that didn't work, they were perfectly happy to take on massive debt and buy up historical studios just as kind of cannon fodder. Disney bought Fox, Skydance bought Paramount, AT&T Time Warner picked up Warner Brothers, and Amazon snatched up MGM. The great consolidation of the cinematic landscape had started. Now, I'm not going to pretend that this was entirely driven by the streaming wars, but it sure didn't help. It was serving as more of an encouragement, not any kind of detraction. So how did Netflix respond to this sudden explosion in competition? Well, with a preemptive strike, of course. They remained ahead of the curve. Before Disney could even dream up Disney Plus, or HBO Max launched one of their 50 different streaming services, Netflix was already starting to take piles of money and light it on fire in this aggressive pursuit of original content. It first began with the acquisition of Lilyhammer, followed by the high-profile production of House of Cards, then the even more high-profile resurrection of Arrested Development, which admittedly probably could have gone a little better. They did have to go back and basically re-edit the entire season they shot and then re-release it a second time. So could have gone a little smoother. The amount of money dumped into this endeavor is staggering. In 2018, Netflix would spend $13 billion on original content, which dwarfed the amount of money spent by rival networks. And how could they afford all this? Well, they didn't. Who needs money when you can borrow money? The idea was to burn money fast and build up a catalog and then slowly wean itself off to a more sustainable rate. but they needed a catalog in order to compete with people that already had that backlog. The problem is that other streaming services, they saw this strategy and they sought to duplicate it. Streaming services were spending cash like a drunken gambler at a casino. HBO and Game of Thrones, they'd already ushered in the age of blockbuster TV shows and set a new standard for higher quality. Studios used to spend $200 million on movies with a chance of at least doubling that at a box office. Now they're spending that $200 million on shows and hoping they're gonna make it back in, $11 subscription fees. It simply was not sustainable, not even for Netflix. This all led to a sharp uptick in streaming pricing, as all the streaming services just threw money into the endless black hole in the hopes that it would return riches, but instead just kind of became a hungrier beast that consumed even more cash. Those wonderful cheap streaming prices has vanished as they all steadied around increasing competitive pricing, alongside the return of a new ad tier. Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos would say the goal is to become HBO faster than HBO could become them. But did they really succeed? Well, in a way. Netflix remains by far the biggest streaming service by a considerable margin. Yet one could say their attempt to buy WB could be something of a surrender. They managed to rack up this impressive subscriber count, and to this day, may be the only major streamer outside the bundled Amazon Prime that is actually profitable on its own. Netflix is a Goliath of a company, now worth around $420 billion. By all accounts, it's won the war. So how can I possibly say that this is a surrender? Well, because beyond its worth just on Wall Street, that's not worth nothing, there is one thing that they failed to create. And that's a large library of original, culturally relevant content. Don't get me wrong, Netflix has some amazing movies and television, especially with such mega hits as Stranger Things, Squid Games, and the recently released K-pop Demon Hunters. However, creating a pop culture staple takes time. It's often hard to tell, when you pour the foundation, which pillars will actually stand the test of time. And Netflix was never the most patient business to begin with. In the early days, they got the reputation for saving shows such as Arrested Development and The Last Kingdom. These days, however, they're more kind of known for killing promising series after a single season or two just because they didn't perform well in the algorithm. I'm looking at you, Mindhunter. They should bring that back, one of the best shows on television. Netflix doesn't actually know if it's made anything with real longevity. I'm talking multi-generational appeal, like Star Wars, Marvel, Batman, or Lord of the Rings. I mean, how could they know? They don't have a crystal ball. You can't just predict these kinds of things. I can, however, predict that they're probably not getting it from such hit movies as The Electric State or the mind-numbingly stupid Rebel Moon. And Netflix does have big successes, but with a few rare exceptions, they tend to be a flash in the pan, a momentary spike in interest before they are lost forever in the slush pile of the algorithm and just fully forgotten. Like, who remembers the Jamie Foxx movie that came out just this year? Do you remember that? Can you even remember the name of it? So what's the answer to all this? Well, buy up a historical studio with a built-in cultural relevance. And that is exactly what Netflix is trying to do with their $83 billion bid for Warner Brothers. WB has what they're looking for. It has many properties that can be used in a similar way as Disney has with the MCU and Star Wars. For starters, it has their rival DC. It has Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and the entire Monsterverse. It has a possible endless library of content for Netflix to bring into the fold. But beyond that $83 billion bid, what's the real price of this? Netflix has already done a good amount of damage to physical ownership. In fact, I would kind of blame it a little bit for jump-starting the corporate culture and mindset that customers should own nothing and instead pay for it for all eternity in the form of subscriptions. You can see it everywhere now, from Adobe Creative Cloud, which was used to edit this very video, to treadmills, to even Tesla trying to get you to pay a subscription just to open your garage door. Hey, great. Yeah, what a wonderful world we're living in. I'm surprised my local brewery doesn't now charge me a monthly fee just to get a beer. Now, that would be the final straw, okay? It's all I have left. The death of physical media is not just the death of ownership. It's actually the death of an entire revenue stream for movies after leaving the theaters. Films used to rely on additional ancillary revenue from video rental stores or people just adding it to their own collection. And those old revenue streams have quickly evaporated. With it, the mid-budget film kind of became more risky as theatrical successes became all the more important. Low-budget or high-budget gambles became the new standard. Stuff like A24 putting out like a $12 million movie, or you get a giant Avengers film that costs as much as, a small country. Low-budget or high-budget gambles became the new standard. studios were betting their entire annual performance on only a handful of movies knocking it out of the park. They then take that money and use it to offset flops and fund more artistic endeavors. This has all basically become a big screen casino, especially for the people funding these things. Now, Netflix may release the occasional season of television like Daredevil to DVD and Blu-ray, but it remains very hostile to physical media and prefers that you have to keep coming back and paying that subscription. So my piece of advice for all of you, I would buy your Lord of the Rings special editions in 4K while you still can. The other price we pay as consumers is in choice. With the acquisition of WB, Netflix absorbs possibly their biggest competitor in HBO Max. With it, they'll have 43% of market share in subscribers. Now you may be saying, hold on a minute, isn't that, I don't know, illegal? Well, yes, in fact, it is illegal. It's actually a legal monopoly. But Netflix is going to argue against this by claiming that YouTube, the very service you're watching this on, is actually also a streaming service and not this weird mix of social media, video aggregate site that, it actually more really is. Sure, they have some original shows and content, but that's not really their focus. That's not what you all are probably coming here for. But by having a monopoly, Netflix would do exactly like the railroads and Rockefeller before them, jack prices through the roof. I hope you're really excited for those $60 streaming fees, because I can tell you right now, they're coming. And barring that, you'll just be drowning in so many ads. You'll be just dreaming of the glory days of uninterrupted viewing at 420p from a Netflix of 2007. And that's not even getting into, this is probably going to cause a lot of streaming services to get back into bundling up all their services. So if all of this is starting to sound a lot like cable again, congratulations, you've been paying attention. It seems like everything keeps wanting to evolve back into old television again. Yeah, it's weird. It's almost like that financial model actually worked for some reason. So not only does Netflix get to win the game of Monopoly, but they also get to pretty much kill off one of their biggest competitors. And HBO was a very different business model. In fact, I don't think you can really get any more different than Netflix and HBO. The Netflix model is often this throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, which in many ways has worked for them as it's created a lot of continual content, and some of it is occasionally actually quite good. The problem is you often have to sift through a lot of slop to find the good stuff. HBO has a more calculated approach. It does not have as much of a steady output, but it is more careful in where it puts its money. It's more going for quality over quantity. This approach resulted in one of the richest libraries of all time, but also heavily catering to just an adult audience. This all begs the question of what happens when Netflix gets its hands on the levers of production. You think you have a lot of Game of Thrones shows now? Wait until you have about 6 a year, and all of them with the production quality of The Witcher Blood Origin, or whatever it was called. I think that's right. I don't know. See, I don't even remember that show. I'm sure it was great though. I don't know. Probably not. Or what about all the nice, juicy, big fat franchises they're gonna get their hands on? Who knows what Netflix would decide to do with these? Maybe they'll just decide to completely reboot a lot of them. Would they even want to keep James Gunn and DC Studios? Or decide to reboot it a third time into a more Netflix-friendly format? Who knows? I don't know, okay? I'm just throwing it out there. Know what I don't need to see? I don't need to see a complete reboot of Lord of the Rings on TV. I think Amazon's got that failure pretty well covered. Now, the optimistic viewpoint would be that Netflix would keep both these services separated. After all, HBO is a massive platform on its own. But I'm gonna say that viewpoint may be a little too optimistic. I personally think you will see something very similar to Hulu, a slow integration. At first, they'll stay independent and standalone. Then HBO shows will start popping up on Netflix, then more, then more, then more, until soon the other service is redundant and retired, just like how Hulu will be in 2026. And if you think HBO Max is getting the short end of the stick, you haven't been in a theater recently. If there is one industry that will be feeling the burn of this, it will almost certainly be theatrical exhibition. Netflix has remained incredibly hostile to theaters. They're continuing to show it with their recent release of Wake Up Dead Man. Sorry, did I say release? It'd be more accurate to say it was never released, or barely released. This is a movie that would have made a killing at the box office if not for the incredibly short and limited time on the big screen. It is a format that Ted Sarandos called outdated, archaic, and dying. And maybe he's right. Maybe people would rather sit in their home. I mean, after all, you don't have to worry about teenagers talking too loud, kids kicking the back of your seat, or overpriced popcorn. Best of all, you can stare at your phone half the time, not engage with actual art, and have Netflix have their characters reiterate exactly what happened every few minutes. This is all a little too dystopian for my liking, but sure, if it's your thing, go for it, I guess. Have a ball. There is, however, a little problem with wishing everything to go straight to your living room television. The first issue is there's only one streaming service that could survive this model. The rest of the studios are carried by the traditional theater distribution model. It's widely acknowledged by filmmakers and Hollywood in general that their current structure of production cannot survive without theaters. The death of theaters as a whole will not mean everything just goes to streaming instead. It means a lot of it just won't be made at all. It's already hard to justify the massive budgets of today. And on the small screen, it's going to be almost impossible to justify that massive budget. Now, that may have a positive effect of the return of the mid-budget movie, but that is certainly really looking for those silver linings. The worst of all this is, I think Netflix knows this. I, for one, do not believe for a second that this acquisition is so innocent. Yes, I'm sure Netflix would love to kill off one of their biggest competitors in HBO Max and gain all those properties, but they certainly have other motivations. Everyone right now is wringing their hands at Netflix potentially blowing up the entire film industry. But to be honest, I think Netflix is salivating at that chance. Remember how I said Netflix is one of the few profitable streaming services? And remember how I said the other studios rely on theatrical exhibition to even survive? Well, now let's put myself in the shoes of a company whose main concern is capturing subscribers and market share. What is the best possible way to do that? Well, burn it all to the ground. If I could hurt theaters, that would hurt almost all my big competitors. If my competitors are hurt, they can't support their streaming services. And if that happens, they lose the ability to finance their films and their television shows. And most of all, they lose their ability to really compete in any kind of meaningful way. I don't even have to buy my way into a bigger monopoly. I can just sit there and just strangle out the competition, close off the floodgates, and let them have no source of revenue because the theaters are dead. Despite Ted Sarandos claiming that they are not trying to destroy the American film industry, I don't actually believe him. I think it's completely to Netflix's benefit to damage the theatrical model as much as possible. Crush it if they can. After all, there is only one winner in that scenario. And no, it's not the consumers like he's trying to claim. And it's certainly not the theaters, and absolutely not the art form as a whole. It's just the company. The Onceler, once full of promise and hope for positive change and innovation, now finds himself cutting down the very trees that are the lifeblood to his business, all for a quick buck and to make useless needs that it turns out nobody really needed or wanted. By the time the forest of art is dead and gone, it may already be too late. Now, in truth, do I think Netflix will actually be able to kill the theatrical model? No, I don't think so. Because I do think that story is an inclusive art form that really is at its best when people come together, when we're all sitting in a room as a group to positively or negatively feed on each other's laughter, tension, or just have the entire room jump at a particularly good, cheap jump scare. Whether it be the old days of Shakespeare stage productions, people cutting each other apart in a coliseum, or the first time the Lumiere screened a train coming right at the screen. Empathetic connection, which is the basis of storytelling. And that's something only group viewing provides. It's something you can't get sitting in the bathroom staring at your smartphone. So no, I don't think theaters will completely die, but the theatrical model as we know it will die. If Netflix continues to push the trend of shortening theatrical windows, we will see the large multiplexes start to close. And some may say this is inevitable anyways, especially with current viewing trends. You can see this from Dan Murrell's woefully titled Road to Recovery chart that he does on his show every week, a graph that maps the box office unadjusted since the pandemic. Things are not heading in the right direction, let's just put it that way. And Netflix's acquisition would certainly accelerate this process. If I was to look into my crystal ball and make a prediction, it would be this. Multiplex's days are numbered. In the next 30 years, possibly far less, they will slowly die out, just like Blockbuster or the drive-through cinema. Oh, they'll be remembered fondly. We'll look back at their glory days. But they won't be able to survive if things are going so quickly to streaming. In their place, I think we'll see a regression back to something like the movie palaces of the 1930s. Going out to the movies will be more like going out on the town or to a nice restaurant. You'll see a rise of much more large establishments like IMAX that put a lot of money into making their theaters the premier viewing experience. And this will become the norm. Theaters that are massive screens, full sound systems, and vibrating chairs, but are more limited by the fact that they only have 2 screens or so. Is this the worst possible future? No, but it would mean less lower budget movies on the big screen, and far fewer movies in theaters in general. And the ones that do make it will be either the big spectacle films or the notable prestige films from notable directors. For lovers of the theater or just the art form, this is a big loss. Again, all of this sounds very similar to cinema distribution through the 20s and 30s. Don't like this? Well, your options are a little limited. The only real hope here, honestly, is Paramount to win their attempt at a hostile bid of $117 billion. Now, a hostile bid is when they take it straight to the shareholders and just bypass the board. This attempt, it really doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And honestly, personally, I think Paramount will be nearly just as bad as Netflix is. It's another massive consolidation of two historical studios and combining them together. There's also the slim hope that the government's going to come in and shut down this purchase on the basis of antitrust laws. In fact, some have argued Netflix may not even be looking to legitimately buy the company at all. They could be using this to bog down a competitor for 2 years under just legal proceedings. I wouldn't completely bet on that, okay? That may be hopeful thinking. So the only thing you have left is to make your voice heard, wherever you can. Unsubscribe to those that don't support the art forms that you support, and subscribe to those who do. Like, hopefully this channel. Hey, yeah? Gotcha. But really, that's all I have for you for this one, okay? If you like this video, please check back for my Who Killed the Pirates of the Caribbean video, hopefully coming out around Christmas time. And after covering who may kill all of cinema in general, that feels like it's gonna be a little lower stakes. See you back here for more historical film flashbacks and modern movie analysis. Keep those reels turning.